topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello, and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Talk4TV or W4CY.com radio and other platforms. I am Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, an emotional wisdom training specialist, and a diversity educator. And I'm very grateful to have a platform to share views on topics that can often be charged, perspectives that have frequently and for centuries been marginalized, and things we really need to talk about and we need to be able to talk about. Excuse me. If you're interested in seeing any programs I offer, I coach individuals, I train groups. You can check out my website, knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. I really take a look at societal patterns and how we can actually influence change of those patterns. And the patterns were learned by conditioning, and we can, with effort and commitment, we can unlearn and develop new patterns that are far more inclusive, because we know in our society there are many groups subjugated for the benefit of a primary group that founded this country. That is called the U.S., which is so great and which we love in so many ways. And I think part of being American is to do what our Constitution asks us to, which is to be active and hold our elected leaders and even our non-elected politicians accountable and reflect what the people want. So I really am, again, grateful to have this platform and have guests who are willing to come on with me to have conversations. And today, if you saw the title of my show, I called it Who's in Charge of Your Body? And it might sound like old news to some people, but the Supreme Court of the United States did overturn Roe v. Wade, which was nearly 50 years old for nearly half a century or a century. Women, childbearing people have had the right to their own bodies and their own choice about when and how they can have children. And that news is still a shocker, I believe, to the majority of Americans. And I think there's a lot of processing still going on. Many people reached out. But today, let me introduce my guest now. We have Mayor Gloria Partita, who has been a guest before and always has very informative perspective and information to share. So Gloria, thank you so much for being here. I do want to mention Gloria has been a major influence on inclusion in our schools, very active person who makes the community better for everyone continuously in various ways. Gloria founded the Davis Phoenix Coalition, and the Davis Phoenix Coalition exists to engage the community to promote well-being, to decrease intolerance, to prevent hate, and to include. And I know there is even more to it than that. But Gloria, thank you so much for being here.
Of course, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm always happy to have deep conversations.
Thank you. And I think they're so needed.
Absolutely. Yes. So let me just jump in here and say that it's, as you were speaking and talking about, or posing the question, who's in charge of your body, the thing that came to mind for me was it depends on who you are.
Mm.
And unfortunately, that is the legacy of sort of the systems that we have in the United States or in the world, right? So people who are in power tend to be white men. And if you asked who's in charge of your body, you'd have to ask, um, you know, who who are you talking about, right? So the question is, if you're a man, then no one is in charge of your body, right? But
Mhm.
if you are a woman, then that is a different question. And if you're a woman of color, it historically has has a lot of implications. There's a lot of implications about, who's in charge of brown bodies, right? So, I mean, when we started having these conversations, people, mentioned like forced sterilization that was a part of our history and a part of a history for women of color in particular. I mean, recently we had the reluctance for people of color to get vaccines. And there was a reason for that, because there's such a distrust of the medical, of the, of medicine and people in medicine, because there has been a lot of things that have been done that, have just not created an trust in the community. And so that I think it's a great question to ask,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And I also think that you it we should be in charge of our bodies, and how how do we do that when we're being thwarted by policies that are set, outside of our own agency.
Yes, a lot of people are asking that question. And we can talk more about that here too, but I wanted to first thank you for bringing up forced sterilization, because that's definitely been on my mind too. That's part of our own history here. And I recall in another country where I lived for 3 years, that seeing like a mobile truck that was paying the brownest, darkest women in the community to step inside the truck and agree to have their tubes tied. But, Lord knows how much was actually explained in the huge exploitation and oppression that we have our own version. We had our own version of here, and this certainly feels like a step back, to state the obvious. And I find, and I imagine you too have been hearing. I just feel like a lot of what helps us move forward is to be able to process first and get clear and validate and support people who are like really slammed,
Sure.
literally in their lives, literally slammed in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I read a couple of the stories of, things that are happening in other states, as, some of these laws are changing. Certainly on the day of that this was announced, and, I read an article where there were, where they kind of followed a clinic as it, heard the news and had to go out into the waiting room and tell the women that they, couldn't have their procedure that day, and then having to get on the phone and call women and say, we're sorry, we can't take you today, and no, you can't make another appointment. Um, I read a story of an 18-year-old, who was pregnant, and on the day, I think this was in Texas, and on the day that she found out that she was pregnant was the day that they had basically said, changed the law around abortions. And so she ended up with twins, and she was 18, and basically all of the things that she had planned were that she had planned for her life were now uh, you know changed. And I think that people don't realize how how much of a setback this is going to be for not just individual women, but for our entire country. When
Yes.
you think about like the poverty that we already struggle with, right? And in the 50s, we had there was a different, the economy was different. And so you could, have a high school education and buy a house and buy a car and support your family. We're not living in those times anymore. And even in those times, there were people who, you know, that that couldn't even do that, right? And there were some clear lines around, who those people were. And I think that people don't realize that how much you're going to force everyone, into this place where, climbing out of poverty is going to be uh, just impossible for some groups of people. And um, I think in the past, when you think about like democracy and you think about the policies and you think about, there's a lot of talk around the sort of the polarization of our country. And some of that, I think, is because, again, if you talk about the 50s, there, uh, the people in power were all the same people, basically.
Yeah.
People in power were not minorities. They were not people of color that were in power. And so there was a lot more similarities between the groups of people that were in power. But now the diversity of our country has changed so drastically, and it has changed because people who are on the margins are now moving into the mainstream, but that includes women as well, right? And so the mix is so much different. And so now there's a lot more of people feeling like they have to protect their power and their places in the world. And so, unfortunately, it's still those groups of people that uh, that have traditionally been in power that are thinking, let's make these changes and get back to where we were. But the landscape has changed so drastically that they don't realize like how much of an impact this is going to be for everyone, right? So I think about my own trajectory. And I was in a very difficult and abusive relationship, and I had three pregnancies, three children out of my three pregnancies. But I was on birth control, right? So it was not that that it was irresponsible at all, but things happen. I think that you can talk to any number of women our age, or even young women now who are in college and have had to deal with a pregnancy or the scare of a pregnancy, and just how much of a derailing that is, right?
Yes, I'm so glad you said that, because there are things about this change that seem extremely, extremely short-sighted, like not rational, like not thinking about implications, ramifications, and what happens. And again, like you said, not just to the individuals. Like, suppose somehow you can absolutely have no empathy and you actually don't care about women and their lives, and hold the belief or the power to say something a fetus beginning to grow in you is more important in your life. It's okay if you die. Like, even if you didn't have the empathy to recognize a woman's life, to not even think about what you were talking about, the implications on all of our systems,
Right.
and
Yes.
the pressures, and the fact that so much of what is called pro-life seems to be about control and about defending a fetus being able to grow and to become a baby, and pro-birth. But then, what about what happens after? What about the responsibility of the baby? You know, and what about
Sure. Yeah.
all
And
how, like you said, it just totally changes the course of life, which we're not saying is, clearly having babies and reproduction is a beautiful human thing, of course, absolutely. But but we should be able to say when it's right and when we can take care of them and how to.
absolutely. And we have not, we've not adjusted our systems so that we have things like universal daycare. We don't have universal preschool. We don't have universal access to contraception, even. And we don't, absolutely don't have universal health care for women. And so, without any of those services in place, this is, we are really, really condemning women to second class citizenship.
Absolutely.
I mean, it really is. And we put out a statement yesterday, city council meeting. We had a city council meeting yesterday. And in writing that statement, I was very cognizant of people who feel just as strongly about the right to life, right? I mean, you know, when you talk about empathy, I have great empathy for people who, really feel very passionately about their religion, and they feel that this is a cause that they have to defend. And I understand this because there are causes that I feel very passionately about that I feel that I have to defend. And sometimes those ideas and values run up against each other. But I think that there is space to have both of those ideas. I mean, this is what our country is about. Our country is about the freedom to express yourself, but the idea that that abortion is wrong is a Christian idea, and we are allowing, even though we have this separation presumably of church and state, we are allowing religion to write policy, and I think that's wrong.
And if I can add to what you're saying, which I so appreciate, first of all, about space, I think that for me, that because I also have empathy, I can have the ability to put myself in others' shoes and understand other perspectives. But I also really like to be able to ask questions about, do you see the implications of removing choice? Because to me, that space, yes, there's space for ideas and thoughts and beliefs and philosophy, but to me, the space was choice. Like I'm just as upset about forced sterilization as I am about removing the option to say I need a procedure because this isn't going to work. So I definitely respect choices, but the removal of a choice.
That's right.
To me, that's like, I think it's really difficult to reframe it. I think the whole framing of this conversation since, I don't know, maybe the Reagan era has become narrower and narrow and been overshadowed by voices that were called, that perhaps felt more righteous and more religious, so to speak. But I think certainly there are, secular and people of other religions who feel just as passionate about their beliefs. But I feel like the same relatively small group of people who have sort of currently dominated the removal of the choice. To me, what I ask about morality is, to me, it is unconscionable. It is unconscionable if a state now, and I know some are, it's really hard for me to even say out loud, to force victims of rape or incest to full term and to give birth. And it's knowing that so many of them are kids, young. I mean,
That's right.
I tried to picture what will it be like if a sixth grader who was incested or raped is walking around in your school, or in, I would like to, honestly, and I don't mean it in a mean way, I mean it in a consciousness raising way. How do the Supreme Court justices, the 6 or 5 or 6, and other people who support the removal, the overturning of a human civil right over your own body, how would it feel if you saw these 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, doesn't really even matter age, it just gets so young sometimes, who's victimized and who has no control over the body, to be able to be expected to be a mother? Like, how is that conscionable?
Right. Yes, and definitely, I'm glad that you mentioned that it's difficult to talk about these things, but I think that is part of the problem. Is that it's hard for people to even say the word abortion. People will say a procedure, will say it's a medical something, and so it's hard for people to talk about abortion. It's hard for people to talk about incest. It's hard for people to talk about rape. It's hard for people just to, it's hard for people just to say the words and to basically admit that those terrible things exist in our world.
Yes.
So and so if you don't talk about it, you don't have to think about it, but it leaves the burden of all those terrible experiences with the victims. So the victims can't talk about it either. They can't, say, I've been raped and I'm now pregnant, and and I don't want to, carry this, to term. So it's, and until we are able to very openly talk about these things, it's going to be easy. It will be easy for the powers that be to impose what they want on us, right?
Yes.
So I, when we had a rally recently, somebody mentioned, that they feel that there should be like a Me Too movement for abortion, right? Because, it's not one of those things that people will offer and say, I was in a position where I had to have an abortion, and I think that is very, very true, that we have to face up to the fact that there are things that happen in the world that are unpleasant, but it doesn't mean that they are, shameful, right? I mean, that it's shameful for the person that perpetrated this, but should not be shameful for the victim.
Absolutely, very well put. And that just reminds me, because I worked in the world of domestic violence for a number of years, and and we used to educate systems, medical people, lawyers, judges, about victim blaming and how not to victim blaming, and how to look at the reasons it takes victims so long to even speak out and break silence, and why it takes so long to be able to shift your life. And I feel like that's just, I just love what you mentioned, because as long as it does, I mean, the burden is still on the victims to keep speaking up and voicing experiences about realities that people don't want to hear about. It is
Right.
painful. It's painful to hear about it. It's painful to know about it, but
Mhm.
it is so much different when you experience it.
Right, right. And I think that the other thing is that we have to start seeing the access to abortions as an extension of healthcare for women,
Absolutely.
right? And when you talk about, if you say that it's wrong, it becomes part of this narrative of shame. But
Exactly.
if you reframe and say this is an extension of healthcare, it pulls it out of that shameful space and puts it into a continuation of healthcare, right?
Yes. Absolutely. I totally want to talk about that. And you're totally right. That I think has been part of the exclusion of the fact that it is health. Our bodies have health needs, which is so basic. It's somehow sort of unbelievable that we've sort of collectively been kind of conditioned to just see it through a little narrow lens. But thank you for the broadening it to healthcare issues. And I will mention right now, and I'll mention again at the end of the show, next week. I believe we are going to revisit this topic when we'll have medical perspective to give examples, because I think we're way undereducated. I would say the public, for like medical reasons, and why this is actually, it is actually truly really a part of healthcare and
Sure.
healthcare access. And when that's what I'll talk more about next week, because I think we'll have the head of NorCal Planned Parenthood, Gilda Gonzalez, also, which will be fantastic. But I think we really need to, and I mean, I really do believe the majority of people get this, but the powers that be, um,
And I mean, if you look at the percentage of people who support abortion, it's a
yes,
majority of the country. And it's wild to me that you could have a decision that was made, or you could have something that was taken away. You have a right that was taken away
yeah,
when there was support for that, right?
it is really
Um,
mind blowing.
I,
Yeah,
I think that is, talk about, just things that are wrong. That's wrong, right?
yeah. When you think about the progression of like the people involving in people's voices and civil rights and human rights, and the fact that this is the first time ever that a recognized constitutional right has been removed, it's just shocking, like,
Sure,
and,
sure.
and
And it's deeply troubling that Clarence Thomas made his remarks about visiting other decisions that have been made that are sort of under the same um, that are under the same I'm not sure what it's called, um, what legalese that they
mhm,
use,
mhm,
but that's alarming. It's
mhm.
alarming to think that you could now roll back, gay marriage, and that you could roll back other freedoms that people have fought for, and other rights that people have fought for. Um, so that is equally troubling as well, because
Mhm.
where do you stop? I mean, we already see an attack on like voting rights and things like that. So
It's true. It's true that it's like on top of already being in the I I almost don't want to recap what we've all been through the last 2 or 3 years. But on top of the, let's hope we're coming out of the pandemic, um, in a long-term way, and I'm grateful for all that has been done, but on top of that now and I'm also grateful for the United States, some of our elected leaders holding hearings to really collect evidence about how our our country has been lied to by our um, former president and his band of allies, and that like just to think about all the undercurrents we're dealing with, and and then then the two latest Supreme Court decisions, and this one completely taking more than half of the population and putting us all of a sudden back into second class citizen category, as you said. It's a
mhm.
lot to deal with. And then as if that's not all enough, that Clarence Thomas is like sending out this signal of like, oh, how about
Right.
this? How about
Yes.
that? Like, do we need that? Really? Like, what are people thinking? What are people thinking? The people
Right.
with decision power make the power to make decisions that influence all of us.
Sure. Sure. And yeah, yeah, it's just it's a lot. It's a lot, but I think that um we need to mobilize and we need to be in those places of power so that we're not blindsided, and we shouldn't be blindsided because it's it's not really anything that we are not aware of, right? So I think that oftentimes we forget
Yeah.
that if we're not in those places of power and we're not um, able to make uh, decisions at every level, that this is what happens, right? So this is the outcome of of people who are the most vulnerable not having access to um, to having their voices heard, right? So it's something that has to constantly happen. We need women, you know, at all levels of of our um, of our of our systems, right? In the Senate, in Congress, on at the local level, we need people of color in our schools, and uh, I know that people get tired of hearing about things, about having conversations around race. They get tired of listening to sort of this constant talk of oppression or whatever. But these conversations have to happen, and people have to move into those places. I am often shocked at how uh, it just I guess I think about, well, yeah, of course, that we have to you know be that, or we have to be equal, right? We have to think about equity in everything that we do. And so I'm often shocked when people don't identify some policy or some aspect that they don't perceive as being inequitable, because it's not inequitable for them, right? So and they can't you know they just can't see it, right? And that's why you need to have representation of all peoples in the places that are making decisions.
That is so true. It is so true how we really need each other to expand our understanding about what's other people's reality.
Yes, right, right. And I think that this particular decision, there has been an organized uh, movement of folks that have worked on this for a very long time, right? And there are states that have just been waiting for this movement, for this moment in time, and if we are not actively countering this, then we shouldn't be surprised, right? um, I just it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's constant work. So I would say to people, stay angry, stay angry, and keep working.
And I want to connect that back to the reason I mentioned that we have hearings happening also right now in the United States, looking at some really destructive decisions some of our political leaders chose. To me, that connects back to, well, let me put it this way. I can't help but wonder how many people would find common ground more easily if we knew the truth. I mean, it's kind of stating the obvious, but it's just been sad how, on top of the fact that, being American is, like you said, it's a job. It's a constant responsibility. And I know sometimes we're mothering little ones, or there's sometimes where we ourselves can't do it all the time, but you hope enough people are being, proactively getting their voices out there. And the press, of course, plays a really important role of in our process of keeping democracy accountable. But I just feel like, I don't think it's just wishful thinking, but there's just been so many sad conversations just in the last few years where people were in this new kind of division, like newly divided based on lies and hearing, and and that it just makes me think that if we could agree on facts, again, perhaps I'm stating the obvious, but if we could see the same stories, I think it might not be so divisive, and it certainly wouldn't be so, I think there would be so much less kind of vehement negative attitudes thrown around.
Well, I think, as I said in the beginning, I think it was easier to do when everybody looked the same. When everybody that was having those conversations looked the same and came from the same place, it's easier to, I think it's easier to agree with, or easier to come to an understanding with someone of your own tribe, right? But now we are having these discussions, and we're having this sort of divvying up of power across race lines, and across gender lines, and across identity lines. And that is always harder to do, and it's easier to give alternative facts, right? When you are not affording the other person personhood, even, right? So you're not, that person is not really a person in your mind, and so you don't even owe them the truth, right?
Well put.
So I think that this is a new reality for our entire world, is learning this ability to be in relationship with people who are not from the same tribe, right?
Yeah. And I appreciate that you talk about our entire world, because no matter what we're doing in America, we have a major influence over. I'm not saying we're superior than at all. I'm just saying we have a major, for good and for bad, we have a major influence over what happens in other countries.
Sure. Yes. Yes. So anyway, I think that we need to find where to jump in and try to mitigate the damage that has been done, by this decision. And I'm sure that I know that there are already other states that are trying to find workarounds. And I think that right now this is where we have to put our effort. Today I was hearing how what was it? Was it the pill? I'm not sure what the name of it is, but it's not the Plan B, but it's the
Preventative pill?
where you can it's the abortion pill, and it's federally regulated, right? So the it has federal regulation, and federal rules supersede state rules. And so if you can, if Medicaid says that you can take this pill if you are at risk of dying from a pregnancy, and that is a federal rule, that should supersede a state rule. And so I know that people are scrambling to figure out ways to work around this.
Thank you for mentioning that. That is an excellent point. And I know we need to wrap up, and I know you have another meeting. But before we go, I just want to mention to listeners and viewers to look up the Sacramento Observer. There's a great article called "Black Reproductive Justice Advocates Say the Fight for Abortion Rights Isn't Over," and you can find that newspaper online. It's a very powerful article and paper. But I also want to thank you, Mayor Partita, and mention that tomorrow is the last day of your being our mayor here in Davis. And thank you for all your work. You're a very hard worker. You've done a fantastic job. You're incredibly inclusive. And I really appreciate you showing up here today for me.
Of course. Yes. And thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And I want to thank our engineer, Roxy, our producer, Dean, and so many people helped me figure out a panel also on this topic for next week. Be sure to tune in next week, Wednesday at 8 p.m. for It's Your Voice on W4CY.com or Talk4 TV. And may we all have enriching conversations this week.
Thank you.
Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech